Joining me from Istanbul, syndicate columnist at The Economist, Taha Arvas, and in the United States, senior Washington DC correspondent Dan Raviv. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Dan, we'll start with you over in Washington. The US knows all too well Turkey's intentions regarding the Kurds in Syria. Was Trump's expectation that Turkey would abandon those intentions with the US absence in Syria?
Well, a lot of this has to do with appearances. Donald Trump, for various strong reasons, wants to get out of Syria before things get even more troublesome with the apparent end of the civil war there. There'll be a lot of movement, a lot of factions, a lot of armed factions. And frankly, Trump doesn't want the United States caught in the middle. So he's decided that the 2,000 American troops really ought to leave. They already started moving out their equipment. He thinks that's the best thing for the United States. He thinks his voters here in the U.S. will really like that too, Tracy.
All right, Taha, to you in Istanbul. Did Erdogan interpret that the U.S. withdrawal was an open invitation to advance its planned offensive against the Kurds?
Yeah, I couldn't hear the response to the other guest. Just I'm not sure if he mentioned anything about this. Did Erdogan interpret? I assume that President Trump the story is that President Erdogan and Trump were on the phone, and President Trump said, "We've defeated almost all of ISIS." And President Erdogan responded, "Then why are you still in Syria?" And he turned to his advisors and asked, "Why are we still in Syria if we defeated ISIS?" And he decided then on the phone that the U.S. would withdraw from from Syria. So that's the story. That's the story of how the call went. From that, you would understand that Trump essentially said, and today he said in his tweet as well, that he wants a buffer zone, a 20-mile buffer zone, which is a Turkish idea floated in 2014. So it appears that he has come to the Turkish side's request for a buffer zone in the north of Syria.
Sure, but Taha, to that point, the United States, or rather Turkey, knows that the United States has been backing the Kurds in that fight against ISIS. So did Erdogan interpret that by Trump saying, fine, we'll withdraw our troops because ISIS is defeated, that was an open invitation to move in with what it had already said publicly and for a long time? It had a planned offensive to eliminate the Kurds from that area, which of course it sees as a threat to its national security.
Yeah, I mean, it's incorrect to refer to them as Kurds. I mean, in Israel, you don't refer to Hamas as Arabs or terrorists, all of them as Arabs or Palestinians for that matter. Similarly, referring to them as Kurds is a mistake. We're talking about the Turks and Kurds have lived together side by side for half a millennia, if not more. So Turkey doesn't have a problem with Kurds at all. In fact, the strongest part of this government's electorate comes from Kurdish regions. So we're talking about a very specific group of people. We're talking about an offshoot of the PKK, the leader of which was repatriated to Turkey via Israel's Mossad. So we have that to thank Israel for. It's the PKK and the YPG are, according to Lindsey Graham and then Defense Secretary Carter, one and the same. So, the United States recognizes the PKK as a terrorist organization. So it's just semantics. They use them to fight ISIS. That's great. They serve their purpose. And now the United States is kind of done with them. So I think Erdogan is saying, we should root out the terrorists that are hiding amongst the civilians, obviously. But I don't think he has any intentions of going after Kurdish civilians.
And Dan, then, of course, listening to Taha there, the United States, as we know, in a sticky position there with Turkey being a NATO ally and then it fighting against the Kurds, which Turkey sees as the PKK, a terrorist organization, which the United States was fighting with against ISIS. And now Trump saying that it wants, as Taha mentioned, to create this 20-mile safe zone between Turkey and the Kurds. So who will create or enforce or even pay for that?
So far, it's not clear. President Trump hasn't given full details, and even the people who speak for him about foreign affairs, they would include his national security advisor, Ambassador John Bolton, who recently, as you know, was in both Israel and Turkey. But President Erdogan refused to see Bolton because Bolton does not embrace the Turkish argument. As we heard, President Trump seems to be thinking about this now the way President Erdogan does, even coming up with, say, a 20-mile buffer zone idea, which, as you heard from Taha, was a Turkish idea. So President Trump likes what the Turks said, but here's why I can't underline it enough, because it permits the United States to get out, to claim victory, and to say that others, including Turkey, will mop up the remnants of ISIS. By the way, the president, in his tweet, the one that you showed just a couple of minutes ago, he also says that that the biggest beneficiaries have been Russia, Iran, and Syria. As the U.S. has been there and pushing out and destroying ISIS, he says, yes, we benefited also, but now it's time to get out. So he has minimized the danger that ISIS posed to the United States and Western countries. That's because Trump really wants to get out. Tracy.
All right, and Taha, of course, the United States is continuing to withdraw those troops. We're seeing that process underway as we speak. So what is Turkey likely to do now?
Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't hear any of the response from the other guests, so I don't know what he said. What is Turkey likely to do now? Turkey will, I mean, the first thing is the tweet that you mentioned, I think has been misinterpreted by a lot of people. President Trump talked this morning, never mentioning exactly at all what he meant in the tweet. He doesn't say, I will devastate Turkey, or the United States will devastate, or that we will devastate. He just says, will devastate the Turkish economy. I take that to mean that if Turkey enters Syria, that it will be a quagmire, such as the United States experienced in Afghanistan and Iraq. I don't think he means that the United States will devastate a NATO ally's economy. That doesn't make any sense. I think to read it that way is just giving Trump zero credit, that he's a complete, lunatic to say that. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think that's what he means. I think it's a kind of an advisory message. And like I said this morning, he didn't say anything about that. There was no reiteration of that threat. If that was a threat against a NATO ally, I'm sure he would have come back with something. I wish someone had asked him exactly what he meant, and I think we'll get that in days and the weeks and days. But as you have seen in the Turkish currency now, the currency is back to where it was this morning. So investors don't believe at all that it was a threat against the Turkish government or the Turkish economy at all.
All right, well, some strong words there about President Trump there, Taha, but appreciate that perspective. And, of course, as always, our senior Washington, D.C. correspondent, Dan Raviv, thank you.